And we're live. It is Wednesday, the 12th day of November, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 11 o'clock a.m. DC local time, which means that it's 8 o'clock a.m. in Los Angeles, where I currently am. And we're doing an experiment today. We're seeing if West Coast Greek chorus members will show up, or whether they have been sufficiently alienated from the process as a result of the normal live time that, they're just going to skip even when we are on their time. It's going to be an interesting experiment. How many people show up? How many new people show up? How many of the regular Greek chorus shows up? I don't know. There's also the matter that Jeff flags in the chat, which is not enough notice. Well, they did get notice yesterday, of course, but they would have had to have been watching the show to do that. Um, you know, I will point out that some of you guys were here 3 hours ago, and of course, I knew that was going to happen. There's really only so many times I can warn you about the vicissitudes of my schedule. Um, and I did send out a note before the show was supposed to go live saying it's not going to happen in 6 minutes. It's going to happen 3 hours and 6 minutes from now. And 3 hours from 6 minutes from now is now. And the show is here as promised. Folks, I don't have any co-hosts today, at least not that I know of. Um, and yes, Carol, some of us don't look at our emails right away, or in my case, sort of ever. And so, look, I'm sympathetic. There's a communication problem. Um, and, you know, I'm somebody who, you know, kind of communicates for a living. I write stuff but telling people about time changes is one of those things that, there's no good system for. I mean, I could send out a whole new post. What are you doing in the studio right now? Be there 3 hours from now. And by the way, that's true tomorrow and Thursday too. I could do that, but I'm not going to do that because that's nagging people, and it's kind of an asshole-ish thing to do. And by the way, it was 5 in the morning here, and I was actually trying to force myself to sleep a little more. And so, with that, I will just want to say that the sun is only sort of shining in Los Angeles. It is, as it always is, smoggy, but the birds are chirping, and it's going to be a great fucking day. And you are watching Dogshirt TV, and it is a goddamn revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features is that when I'm on the West Coast, it's just morning television, West Coast time. The time is not stable, which is a metaphor for something. And another one of the revolutionary features is that every now and then I start the monologue, and then Richard Wattenbarger shows up with a question that just says, I have some things to say about Brahms. And so I always want to hear what Richard Wattenbarger has to say about Brahms. And so we're just going to end the monologue here and turn things over to him with the following important caveat, which is that, if you have important things to say about Brahms or about other things, this is a great day to do it because there's no agenda. We're just talking. We're going to have a great guest tomorrow who's going to show up to gloat over me. But that'll be tomorrow. Today, it's just, it's just you guys and me and Richard Wattenbarger talking about Brahms. Richard, what is on your mind?
Oh, Excuse me. So the all of your Brahms project has gotten me plunging into Brahms and back into it, and I think, as you know, some of the Brahms scholarship that's out there, and just actually catching up on some reading about Brahms that I'd not done. There's a good biography from around 1990. It's not a great biography, but it's a good biography by Malcolm MacDonald, um,
I have to say, the
of
more you
Brahms.
read about Brahms, the more admirable of a human being he seems to be.
Uh, I suppose depends on what you're reading about Brahms. So, um, but I'm only up to about 1860 right now. Um, the nice thing about the MacDonald book, I'm going to put it down now, is that it mixed biography with discussion of the major works, and it's so that's very nice. The uh, so I the discussion of the music takes a little bit longer to go through if you want to go through it carefully, which I'm kind of trying to do. But it's worth it. Um, I I wanted to bring actually the thing that was on my mind this morning is the part uh, of the book that I'd gotten to, and something I thought about when you posted about the Brahms's first piano trio, the Opus 8 trio. Um,
Which is,
and
I have to say, um, up until the first piano concerto, the only one of the early works that I look at and say, this is a true masterpiece that kind of presages everything that I love about Brahms. All the others, there's some lovely little leader. There's some, there's some stuff that you can see. The first two piano sonatas, you can both see that he's going to be great. But the Opus 8 trio is essentially fully mature Brahms when he was like still barely a teenager.
well, I'm going to throw some rain on your parade because there are actually two versions of the Opus 8 trio. The well-known version, which Brahms, uh, that he extensively revised late in life, and the first version, which I've actually been spending some time with this morning, and it's a reminder that, boy, it's a good thing that he revised it.
Well,
Uh,
you see, that is actually not raining on my parade. That is validating my thesis, which I did not know was true, that this sounds like mature Brahms. And the answer is, because it is. And um, I am actually delighted to hear that because it actually suggests that my ear was picking something up that, wow, this is just better composition. This is really, this is stuff that he's certainly showing by the time of the Opus 25 quintet, right, which is a total masterpiece. But he's not, there's a discipline to Brahms that he is showing that he is not yet showing in this period. And this piece kind of stands out as how the hell did he write this then as opposed to 20 years later? And you just answered it.
yeah, yes, that's exactly what. Yes, well, you definitely picked up on the mastery. It's actually kind of fascinating to go back and listen to. I actually had not heard the first version until a few years ago, and then when I sat down with it, I realized why. Um, but there's a lot of uh, there's a lot in there that is actually very uncharacteristic of Brahms. And when he went back and revised, for example, when he revised the first movement, he kept the he kept the first theme, and that was it. That was basically about it. The
Wow.
what is originally there is
And that's
it's
the
competent. Yeah,
I mean, that's
right.
a gorgeous theme.
And it
Um,
is, it's a very good, yeah, and it's very well wrought. But unfortunately, after he gets past that point, he he goes on a little bit too long. One of the things that's fascinating about it, and I could probably spend more time on with the piece and really dive into it, is you see his you see the self. We don't have we don't have multiple versions of many pieces by Brahms, and what's really nice is to look um, at the revised version and see how this master goes back and and criticizes the early Brahms, and that that in itself is quite fascinating. Uh,
well,
but
there's some really interesting. I mean, we could get into a real Brahms nerd out here that we might be the only audience for. But one of the things that I'm really struck by in the early Brahms is that he is more inclined to do banging sort of, very percussive. And you see that even in the first concerto. It's
mhm,
completely gone by the second concerto. You
mhm,
know, it there's no influence of Liszt or by the modesty that we think of as Brahms's sort of hallmark as a pianist in
mhm,
his later work is there by the second concerto, but it's not there. It's even there by the Opus 25 quintet, but it's not there in in these first two sonatas where you're definitely let me show you how capable of pyrotechnics I am is and like I'm very interested in the psychology of how in middle age he lost that instinct to show off. But I think it's a
yeah.
very striking feature of early Brahms that,
Mhm.
this is, among other things, a kid who wants you to know how good a pianist he is.
Although what I find actually striking is going back and spending some time with the early songs, is that the songs, and maybe it's just because of the uh, because you're dealing with very short forms, they're actually you see the same sort of restraint that you're going to that's going to take over his entire output as he gets older. Um, but
Yes, and I wonder
and
if that's partly because the piano is always in a support role vis-a-vis the singer in a song, whereas in part of that period's idea of a piano concerto is that, or a piano sonata, is that you should be showing off. And this is really conditioned by Liszt, and it's to some degree conditioned by earlier by the Beethoven cadenza, improvising those cadenzas. Um, and he, and, you know, but I think you see it even in the first concerto, but it's really dramatic in the second concerto that he, and I think that in the second concerto it's because he originally imagined it as as a symphony, not as a concerto. But
well,
the
that's the first concerto too.
really, I mean, it
Yeah.
really shows that these
Mm,
are that the degree of partnership between the pianist, the soloist, and the orchestra is just unlike anything else I've seen in a romantic period concerto, which where really the pianist dominates the thing and the orchestra is kind of there to as a backup band.
right. Right. Well, the uh, one of the among the early criticisms of the first concerto, and it may seem hard to fathom unless you think about the something like the Liszt concertos. The fact that it wasn't this let all this virtuosity hang out. Um, all that there. That was people reacted very negative. Critics
Right.
reacted very negatively to that. The other thing about that
But
first concerto.
there was also a creature of that modern influencer culture would recognize. When you went to
Mhm.
see Liszt, you were going to see a personality,
Right.
um, and Brahms is a real break from that. It's one of the reasons these concertos have aged so well, is that
Hmm.
his you don't need it to be performed by Brahms or somebody who you're not going there to see Brahms, right? You're going there to
Hmm.
hear a piece. And so you like how virtuosic the soloist is not nearly as interesting a question when the composer's been dead for 150 years and, by the way, was an asshole when he was alive, which Liszt really was and Brahms was not. Um, and so I think that there's a part of the negative reaction to it in 19th century Germany and Austria was a sense that you were going to see a Kim Kardashian show, and then Kim Kardashian shows up and she's kind of dressed like a normal person, and by the way, she's not really flamboyant, and she's just a really good pianist. And by the way, the composition is wonderful, and maybe that you weren't really listening that much anyway. And I think it's a real thing that comes out in the late 19th century or the mid to late 19th century, where the best performers and the best composers really diverged. You don't like Mozart was both, Beethoven was both, Bach was both, but Brahms is a much, much better composer than Liszt. You
Yeah.
know,
No. I think that's true. One of the the remarkable thing about the first piano concerto, and I'm actually going to get off soon because I think people are getting impatient with all this Brahms talk. But if you listen to there are a couple of things that just hit you right off the bat. The first movement of that concerto is written in a very unusual meter. It's in 6/4. I cannot think of a single first uh, first movement to major work before that time that is in this meter, which is this what I should elaborate a little bit for people listening that uh, you know 6/4 is we're talking about groups of 6 beats, units of 6 beats that repeat over and over again. That's kind of the underlying pulse. But when it's in 6/4, it tends to be a slower, kind of majestic thing, which you really hear in that concerto. Um, and so the piece, just when you open up the score, it says, this is a big piece. And then you get going, and Brahms he delays what we call perfect cadences, perfect authentic cadences, which give you these senses of closure. Well, the longer that you can delay these things, the more, and if you do it well, you can create these big senses of space. And that's very taxing on an audience in the 1850s when this is not what they're expecting in a
right.
concerto. They're expecting very short little nice kind of things that they can glom onto and enjoy the pyrotechnics of the soloist. Brahms isn't going there. And it's really fascinating. It's a good thing that Brahms lived long enough to write pieces that people would be, uh, that they would come to accept, because otherwise this concerto probably would have gone forgotten because it would have been too recondite for the audiences. Anyway, that's uh, that's what I have to say about Brahms. The only other thing is I have a post that I will be putting up soon about what's wrong with romanticism, with the label romanticism, and it won't blow your mind, but but we will end up you will end up talking about romanticism in music differently.
Well, I hate the phrase romanticism in all forms, not just music. I think, but so if you have a better phrase to use for the period from Beethoven uh, to Schoenberg, I am all for an alternative to the Romantic period.
Well, actually, there is a better phrase, believe it or not, and it's difficult to pronounce, but I'm going to try very carefully. The 19th century.
Yeah. Well, you know, your clan, by which I mean the musicologists, have not called it that habitually. And
That actually started to change about 30 or 40 years ago. But most of what you see, but you're right, most of what you've seen calls it that. I've got a post in progress about periodization and talking about
I
romanticism.
also hate the phrase classical,
Yeah,
because
that's
it means
equally.
something completely different to people who are, who know the periods of music, than it does to the general population. And the general population's use of it is actually more rational and reasonable than the elite use of it, because there's nothing especially classical about the classical period, and nobody can really identify when it starts or when it stops, because what really distinguishes early classical music from late Baroque music, and what really distinguishes Beethoven when he's a classical composer from Beethoven when he's a romantic composer. It's a really bullshit distinction, and it would be better to call it the late 18th century.
Well, and in fact, what we do tend now to really, you know, mainly going to, at least to 1600, we tend not to use the period, or a lot of us tend not to use the period labels anymore, because they are misleading, and the other thing is that what the period labels do is they invite a way of thinking about a lot of the pieces that kind of falsifies them,
Right.
and you end up thinking about them in a way that actually would have been unrecognizable to people in their time. So anyway, but I will write about that, and people
Well,
can
do send it
read
to
about
me.
it.
And by the way, if you have brief thoughts about any of the next opuses that I have not written up yet, send them my way for inclusion in Operation Brahms.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll
Um,
just say one more thing, since you are in you are getting close to the sextet opus 18. There are some
yeah, that's a
wonderful.
masterpiece too.
It is a masterpiece.
And
There
was that
is
substantially revised as well, or should I consider that to be
no that's
the
a
young
pretty much a
Brahms having come into his own?
that really is Brahms coming into his own. And in fact, I think in some respects it's an advance even over the piano concerto, which was the piano that was the first piano concerto was a struggle for him to write. It took him 4 years, but the sextet um, is really amazing. There are a number of videos of the violin led by of ensembles led by Janine Janssen, violinist, fantastic violinist, and there is one of the sextet which is terrific. And so I recommend any of her recordings. And actually, almost anything coming out of the Netherlands is just really good these days. So,
Yeah, I am so the sextet is I had forgotten that that was only Opus 18. I am excited to get there. Um, and seriously, just email me any thoughts that you have because I would love to include them as I go through and write these up. By the way,
great.
one thing before I let you go. The most disappointing body of work in early Brahms. These two serenades.
Really,
Neither of them do anything for me.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's kind of surprising, but I like the serenades, but they're not deep Brahms, um, and so maybe they don't they if you were basing your performance review of Brahms on that, he, you know, you'd have him on probation, I imagine.
Well, I will just say about it is the nature of averages that something has to be below average. But
Yeah,
I was just a little disappointed that
yeah,
the Brahms serenades did not blow my clothes off or anything.
yeah. But you know why there is less fluff in Brahms's oeuvre has been handed down to us is that he destroyed a whole lot of stuff. Um,
Well, yeah, so we're going to talk about that a
yeah,
different time, but
yeah,
I actually love that about him, that he just decided, here's what history needs to remember about me. And and he just ruthlessly destroyed everything else. And that is why, to this day, uh, there is so little unpublished Brahms, um, and it's a lot of it is refined. I like the Opus 8 trio when he is an old man. And I think that's cool. I think that's,
yeah,
as any good influencer should, trying to control his image.
yeah. Anyway, so we'll leave it at that, and more to come.
Yes, indeed, more to come. Thank you, Richard. All right. So, for those who are on the West Coast or on welcome, I'm not sure how many of you there are here who aren't usually here, but we're going to be for 2 days, for 2 more days. And we will and you are welcome, and you guys are particularly welcome to come on screen with any of the questions that you might have asked on any subjects or any of the screeds you might have delivered yourselves of were we not normally working between the hours of 5 and 6 in the morning. So vent whatever issues that you have, and welcome. um, all right. Wait. So, Matt C, it says that you are not recording. So hit refresh and it'll start you a new recording track. Whoops. Um, Matt appears to be frozen. Um, let's let's see if he resolves. And in the meantime, he seems to be gone altogether. Um, Matt, why don't you try dismissing yourself and uh, reapplying for admission, and let's see whether that will help. I'm going to make you disappear in the Oops, there he's gone, and I assume he will come back momentarily. But while he is working on that, if you all um, could, if others have things they want to talk about, West Coast or not, this is a very good time to do it. Um, Otherwise, I'm going to have to start raising issues myself. Um, and you never know where things are going to go. I am informed, by the way, by Amazon that my frog costume, inflatable, will be delivered today. And I think you should get a frog costume and join me and Holly and others at the Million Frog March on Saturday. Um, I also have a problem, which I'm hoping you all can help me resolve, which is what is the best way to put an inflatable frog in a dog shirt? Um, I am um, I am, I have a significant torso, but not so significant that it is uh, will not would not constrain an inflatable frog costume. My shirts wouldn't fit. I'm fat, but I'm not that fat. And so I need a way to make a. I'm perfectly happy to destroy a dog shirt in order to do it, but to make the dog shirt go all the way around the frog so that the frog can wear a dog shirt. And so, if anybody has thoughts on how to do that, please leave them in the comments. I'm getting back Friday evening, and this thing's on Saturday, so I don't have a lot of time to work on it. But if you have a quick way to make a shirt large, do let me know. Matt,
Is this
can
thing
you
on?
hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah,
My God, I had
I
to
hear
hit.
you.
All right. Well, it turns out when it says it wants Chrome and not some other browser, it really means it. So, um,
Oh, it really means it. It doesn't like other
yeah.
browsers.
And I had to give it about 10,000 permissions. So thanks for bearing with me. I always said if you did this in a reasonable hour, I would come on. So here I am. And
Well,
if
welcome.
nothing, well, thank you. Nothing better to talk about than the question I would have asked on Lawfare Live last week if I'd thought of it in time, but I've really been wondering about, and that has to do with the Comey trial. And I've just been wondering this a lot lately because it seems to me there's some tension between kind of different outcomes one would want to get from that trial. Like in any criminal trial, normally the thing you want is to get the defendant, you get your defendant found not guilty, right? That's what the defendant wants. But since this trial is about so much more than that, and it really is a vindictive prosecution, and it really does have these political ramifications, another outcome I presume that, you know, Jim Comey would want and the rest of us want is some kind of public acknowledgement of that. And it seems to me those two things are maybe at odds. And my question is whether
Yes.
it's possible procedurally, because I don't know much about criminal procedure, but is there some way to have both? And not, and because I mean, it'd be great to have a judge find that this is a vindictive prosecution, like based on all the evidence in that motion that he filed, and in a public statement. But it'd also be great to have a jury stand up and say this is ridiculous. This is find him not guilty. It would be great to have a judge say
Well, you
that.
can't have
And
both.
so,
You can't have
okay,
both of
so
those
so that's my question.
because
Is there some way? I mean,
once you
yeah,
dismiss it as a vindictive prosecution, the consequence is it doesn't go to the jury.
right,
Ironically, the jury, you know, it, look, there's a devil wins either way quality to this. You if you go to a jury, then the result is not appealable if they
right,
acquit you, right? Because you can't, if you get it dismissed as a matter of law, that is appealable. But
right,
you don't take the risk of a jury trial, which, as any defense lawyer would tell you, juries are unpredictable beasts, and you don't want to put your client in front of a jury if you don't really have to. So, look, I have thought about this issue a lot, and let me be really clear that I have uh, partly so that I am free to have conversations and speculate about things and talk freely about the public record. I have made a point of not being in touch with Jim, and I have not discussed any of these matters at all with either him or his legal team. And the reason I have done that is, in part because I don't want things that I say to, since I don't want things that I say to be seen as um, channeling the defense team, which I'm really not. I've made a point of not being in touch, and I have not bounced any of these ideas off of either them or him. Um, the Look, I think it's a real problem for the defense. Not in the sense that it will prevent them from ultimately winning. I do think they are going to win. The question is, how are they going to win? And there are advantages and disadvantages to different ways that you can win. So the cleanest way to win is because the prosecutor was illegally appointed,
Mhm.
right? And they have a motion on that, which Letitia James also has. They could win on the basis that, Alina Habba was never
Technicality.
lawfully the U.S. attorney. Um,
And then the headline
and,
is Comey gets off on technicality, right? And no one
that's,
wants that.
yes,
Well, maybe Comey wants that, but yeah.
exactly. Now, if you're if you're a defense lawyer, that's great because you're not, your job is to protect your client, and you kept this thing from going to trial. Um, but if you're Jim and you responded to the indictment by saying, okay, let's have a trial, I'm innocent, you know, the fact that Elena Haba is not lawfully the U.S. attorney is may not be the ideal basis on which you want to win. Vindictive prosecution is a little bit of a closer case, I think, because there, part of the motion is he's not being charged because he actually did these things. He's being charged um, he's a because he's a political foe of the president, and the president hates him. And all right, moving up the ladder of vindication, then there's the motion for dismissal because the statements he made are literally true. Well, this is a little bit more substantial because the argument is he didn't lie, even taking the government's facts as they claim. The statements that he made were true. Okay, if you win on that basis, I think you do get to say, I got cleared as a matter of law, but it's appealable. Um, and it will be appealed. And so it doesn't stop. And then finally, there's the motion. I'm sure there will be motions related to, uh, government conduct. They've already teased that there might be motions related to government conduct in the grand jury, or outrageous government conduct motions. And so if you do those, I mean, it really depends how the judge writes it, right? Is it this was an innocent person pursued because the president hates him, and the government's conduct was outrageous, so I'm throwing this out? Or is it, you know, we do not reach the question of the merits of the indictment because, right? And those have very different flavors depending on how you write them. Finally, if you go to a jury, and you don't, all these motions fails and you go to a jury, the advantage to this, of course, is that it's um, it's not appealable. A further advantage is you only have to convince one person out of 12, right? Though I suspect Lindsay Halligan would refile and would force another trial. But as Sandwich Guy showed last week, juries in the DMV are not going to be wildly sympathetic to these types of very political prosecutions. So the disadvantage is you have to roll the dice and take the risk of an actual conviction. And so I don't think there is a neatly ideal outcome. I know what the ideal outcome is for Pat Fitzgerald, for Comey's defense lawyers, which is we take the win any way we can get it. Um, and but if you're Jim, and yes, you are a good lawyer, but you are also the client here, and you want to. I do think there's a part of you that wants not necessarily a jury verdict that you're not guilty, but you want the disposition to reflect the fact not merely that there's something wrong with what the government did, but that there's no reason to believe that you lied to Congress and obstructed an investigation. And I do I do think that's part of the reason why the defense has interlaced all these motions to dismiss so that, the Alina, not keep calling her Alina Habba, the Lindsay Halligan unlawful appointment motion is laced with this suggestion that it's deeply connected to the vindictive prosecution motion. It's deeply connected to the motion that says um, the that the case doesn't even allege a
Yeah.
real lie.
Is there a danger there
So
though
I think
by making that motion? Hasn't Comey raised the danger that the judge may just seize upon that motion because it's the easiest one and say, well, she wasn't appointed right, get rid of this case, and it's the easy. It's for the judge it might be the most attractive option, but for him it's not.
exactly right. No, I think I would look, I think that is the likeliest way for this to be resolved. And I would personally find it a little bit unsatisfying if the result of this were don't delete, you could have gotten Comey if you'd appointed a prosecutor in a reasonable fashion,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? If there's an opinion that dismisses the case without raising any questions about the merits of the case, that strikes me as a suboptimal outcome. Would I take it if I were his defense lawyer? Yeah. As a whatever the hell I am, somebody who talks about this stuff in public, do I think it's an optimal outcome? No.
Yeah. Last question. I got to get my kid to school, but I don't think this solves. I mean, this doesn't solve the problem. But I'm just curious, as a matter of procedure, is there a procedure where the judge can reserve ruling on these motions and let it go to the jury and get a verdict, and just have them in the judge's back pocket post verdict and say, well, in the unlikely event there were a guilty verdict, by the way, she wasn't appointed right, and this was a vindictive prosecution, et cetera, or does the criminal rules not allow for that?
Well, it, I mean, it's basically what the judge did in the sandwich guy case. There was a vindictive
Wow.
prosecution motion, and he just didn't rule on it. Now, I suppose he could, if there had been a conviction, he could have pulled it out of his back pocket. It's not good form for a judge to allow a case to go to a jury with pending motions to dismiss. It's just not the way we usually do things because the essence of a motion to dismiss is it shouldn't even go to a jury
Right.
because. Now, the thing that Judge Nachmanoff certainly would deal with in this context is if he didn't rule on these in a timely fashion, or if he denied them, a lot of them could come back as a Rule 29 motion, which is either before it goes to the jury or after. Um, uh, the defense basically says, we've you've now seen all the evidence, you've seen all the law, no rational juror could vote to convict on this record, please dismiss the case. And that actually is when that happens and it gets granted, which does sometimes happen, a Rule 29 motion is not appealable. Um,
Gotcha.
and so, because it's an acquittal, right? And so, look, there are ways the judge could um, deal with this, but I don't think he wants to do. I don't know this judge, but I don't think that judges, as a general matter, if you're a judge sitting on a district judge sitting on a case like this, a super high profile case, and let's just say it sucks, the case is dirty, um, and if you rule this case sucks, it's dirty, I'm going to dismiss it. That's Supreme Court bait. Um, so you want one of two things. Either you want a really strong record, so that, and then look for him to write a quite substantial opinion that's, very rich with facts, or you want a jury to do it. Um, and I think this case will support, frankly, either outcome. It's very
Yeah.
hard for me to imagine a jury in Northern Virginia that would convict Jim Comey on this bullshit.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's like, I haven't thought my way forward to jury selection yet, but it just strikes me as a very, um, this is a loser of a case in front of a jury. It is also
I got a
one
hop.
way or
Thank.
another.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Thank
It
you.
is
It's kind
also
of
a
nice to
loser
see
of
you
a
at a
case.
reasonable hour.
It's also a loser of a case in front of the judge for any number of reasons, and I don't think it will reach trial. And the real question in my mind is what combination of these motions, arrayed in what order and with what priority, will produce the strongest opinion with which to dismiss the case. And that's a very hard question. Carol,
Yes, I have a very ignorant question.
yes. I'm
If the
sure I have an
case,
equally ignorant answer.
I think you probably do know the answer. If the case is dismissed because the prosecutor was illegal, was not appropriately appointed, can later another properly appointed prosecutor file it again?
This is not an ignorant question. It's a very important question, and I do know the answer to it. So, normally, the answer to this question would be that. So, there's a statute of limitations that she filed this case with 3 days to spare. Those 3 days are gone. So, the baseline answer is no, we are now past the statute of limitations. If you dismiss the case, it can't be refiled because we're now past the statute of limitations. The statute in question, there's a basic rule that says when case gets thrown out for reason of law, you have 6 months to file it again. And so based on that, the normal rule would diverge from the baseline and would say, okay, if it's dismissed without prejudice, they could file it again for up to 6 months, cure the defect, and it wouldn't be Lindsay Halligan on the brief, but if some other prosecutor were corrupt enough to bring it to a grand jury, that could survive.
So that length of
And
time
so,
also, I'm sorry.
hang on, wait, it gets complicated. So Andrew has here linked to the 6 month tolling rule. The problem is that Comey's lawyers, anticipating this, have argued that the case should be dismissed with prejudice because otherwise the prosecutor, the government, would get a windfall of 6 months minus 3 days for acting illegally, right? And the result would be that they extended a statute of limitations by 6 months by acting illegally, the government shouldn't, the judge shouldn't allow that. And therefore, the proper disposition is dismissal with prejudice. The government, in its brief, has objected to this very strenuously and said, I think anticipating that they may lose on the merits of the motion, that any dismissal should be without prejudice. And so a lot actually turns on exactly the question that you describe, at least in this motion. And I do think it's going to be an issue. There you go. It was not
Following
an
up,
ignorant question, and with a little support from Andrew, I had the answer to it.
great. But also this, I was also thinking about, and I know this is irrelevant at this point also, but if the Mar-a-Lago case had been dismissed because Jack Smith was not appointed correctly, assuming that there had been a different administration in charge at this point, could that have been refiled?
So that wouldn't have needed to be, well, so two things. One is that it was on appeal, and the government was surely going to win that appeal, in my view. So it wouldn't have needed to be refiled. But secondly, yes, the government would have had time to refile it and cure that on the basis, on exactly and that is in fact why the statute exists, so that, a purely technical error does not cause the case to go away. And so, those things happen. The government does file curing, refile indictments when such things happen. And normally that's not it's relatively uncontroversial. The reason it's controversial here, of course, is that the only reason this case was filed illegally by a prosecutor who had not been appointed is part of a bigger pattern of vindictive prosecution in this case, right? And so again, this is why these motions are sort of interlaced with one another. And, that's part of the larger fabric of this case, because the entire thing is corrupt.
The other one was just sort of going off on a tangent on on the question. I mean, I realize that the Comey case is the Comey case, but they are polar opposites, right? Mar-a-Lago, he was guilty as sin, and the Comey case is ridiculous.
Well, in Mar-a-Lago, Jack Smith was appointed not because he was willing to bring a corrupt
Right,
case that
right,
nobody
right. No,
else was willing to
I
bring.
understand that. I just was, I mean, because of the election, obviously the Mar-a-Lago case has gone away. And would there be a way, if the next administration were Democratic, would there be a way to bring it back?
So there is a way to try.
Following my digression to the,
Right, there is a way to try. The case was dismissed without prejudice, um, and it could be refiled. There would be a tolling of statute of limitations issues, although I think some of those cases may have 10-year, some of those statutes may have 10-year statutes of limitations because they're Espionage Act. I'd have to look at those. But you would have a question of, you don't have a double jeopardy question, because the right of double jeopardy does not attach until a trial actually starts. So you would, like, there's a question whether you could do it. The major antecedent question is whether you would want to.
and there are many, I mean, he might even not be alive, let alone whatever. I'm just, kind of curious about the whole procedural stuff, and that involve these other cases, but the only reason to follow up with the Mar-a-Lago is because it is such a different example.
Right. Right. And, look, again, these statutes they're neutral, right? They're not, and sometimes I don't have a problem with the idea that sometimes bad people doing bad things get to take advantage of good laws. That's part of a society under the rule of law. I do think the idea that you can maliciously indict somebody and thereby buy yourself some additional time, you know, you can appoint somebody to illegally in order to maliciously indict somebody and thereby buy yourself an extra 6 months to get the
Right,
case in. Like,
right,
that's an
right.
offensive idea to the rule of
Absolutely.
law. And I think the Comey defense team is right to bring it to the attention of the court. And if the court is upset about the prospect of that, dismissal with prejudice is a way to handle that problem.
Thank you. Clarifies a lot.
Thank you, Carol. So we have gone today from Brahms to Comey to Mar-a-Lago and all of that without my having any idea what we were going to talk about when we showed up this morning. Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. It's going to be at the same time as today, which is to say 8 a.m. Pacific time. Our guest is going to be the very estimable Ben Weisner of the ACLU, and who is going to come on once again to gloat over me for my mixed feelings about having advocated for drone strikes. We're going to have a very substantial conversation about it. We are going to, I don't know what's going to be here on Friday, but I'll be here and you'll be here and maybe some co-hosts will be here. It's going to be fun. See you then.